Friend, now is the time to have a little bit of money to lean on in case of an emergency. And I'm going to tell you how I saved up 6 months of expenses for an emergency fund. Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Sid and I make videos about creating a life that I love to live, and that includes working on my finances so I can live how I want and live in ways that I love. In today's video, I want to talk through how I built my emergency fund, why it's important to have one, and all of that good stuff. I have a little over 6 months of expenses saved in an emergency fund, and this kind of fund has been so helpful on my personal finance journey. Now, if you're new here, I'm not a financial advisor. I don't work in finance. I don't have a finance background, but I am someone who has taken a lot of steps to build my financial discipline and have a better relationship with and understanding of money over the years. You know, I paid off my debt before I turned 30, started building a net worth of over 6 figures, and I do what I can to save and invest while also living in the now. So I just want to share more of my story with you in hopes that it helps you along your journey. Let's get into it. First off, before I could even dedicate the energy and the focus towards saving for an emergency fund, I needed to understand my why. And I think that goes for any savings goal. Like, don't be out here just saving money just to say you did it. Having a why and a purpose behind it will take you so much farther. Some reasons that went into my why and some benefits to having an emergency fund is number one, peace of mind. When unexpected expenses come up, an emergency, you want a financial safety net to lean on so you can take care of whatever this is that came up without worrying about, can I still pay my internet this month? Can I still make that car note? Can I still save toward whatever it is that I also have a goal for? If you don't have an emergency fund, then the financial issue of now having an emergency can snowball and create other financial hardship for you, and nobody wants that. And unfortunately, things happen. Emergencies happen, unexpected expenses happen, so why not set your future self up for a better chance of bouncing back easier from those emergencies? For example, last year I had really bad tooth pain that came up all of a sudden, and if you've ever had bad tooth pain, you know that nothing else matters other than getting that situation fixed. Nobody talk to me or else I'm gonna fight. It's so annoying to have tooth pain. And I was able to get into the dentist and they told me that I actually needed a root canal. I never had one before, so I didn't recognize what the pain was. And they were like, we can actually get you in tomorrow, but it's gonna cost you. And I actually think that I had to put a certain amount of money down to even be scheduled for the next day. I gave it no second thought because I was in so much pain. I was like, here's your money. Here's your money right now, and I'll give you the rest when I see you tomorrow, boo. Like, I'm in so much pain and I'm able to cover this emergency expense because of something like an emergency fund. Another reason why I think emergency funds are important is it really sets you up for financial success. I think that once you start saving for something like this consistently, and especially when your fund is fully funded, you start moving a little differently. You start moving more confidently. Like, if I can save for this, I can save for anything. Good savings habits led me here, then they can take me anywhere. Having an emergency fund definitely gave me more confidence to go after the things that I want to spend money on, because I knew that my needs would be in a better place, or my needs would be okay. You know what I mean? I don't battle as much guilt shopping for certain, treat yourself items when I know that my stuff is handled, So how much money should be in your emergency fund? The thing about personal finance is that it's so personal. The dollar amount that's in mine really has nothing to do with how much should be in yours. We all have different things going on. You'll hear a lot, people will say have 3 months of expenses saved. I think that's, a good goal. You'll hear on the higher side to have 6 months of expenses saved. And personally, that's what we did. We have 6 months of expenses saved. And we decided to do that because we are in trying times, okay? And I don't mean just, like me and my husband are in trying times. I mean society, the world. We are in trying times. We started building this emergency fund during the pandemic. People were losing their jobs. Obviously, there's a lot of health stuff going on. We just felt like that was the right thing to do, was to save for 6 months versus 3. And that's why $1,000 could never be the goal for us for an emergency fund. You might hear a lot to save $1,000 in an emergency fund, and that's a great starting point, but I don't think that should be the end goal. I think $1,000 is great if you don't have any savings toward an emergency. But unfortunately, a lot of us need more money than that to lean on in tough times. But I think, once you have that $1,000 saved, move on to a goal of having like half a month's worth of living expenses, and then move on to a whole month's worth, 2 months worth, like work your way up, because in the times that we're in, $1,000 just really isn't enough to cover a lot of unexpected things. So here's how I figured out what my emergency fund should look like. I got pen and paper and started listing and writing out all of the necessary monthly household expenses that we have, along with a few necessary expenses that show up throughout the year that aren't monthly. So this includes rent, gasoline, groceries, auto insurance, renter's insurance, internet, electricity, cell phone bills, health insurance. Now with health insurance, I will say that kind of thing comes out of our paychecks with the kind of jobs that we have. So I just looked at, the pay stub to see how much do we spend in health insurance a month and added that to this list. I also added taxes, meaning for us personal property tax, which is not a monthly expense. I just, included this in here anyway. And I also added some money for car maintenance. We don't get our car serviced every month, so I just made up a dollar amount so that I could, account for this expense in case it ever were to come up. So that is what goes into my emergency fund. You might have some different things that you need to add in there, like daycare, medicine costs, debt payments, anything like that. Everyone's situation is unique. So I added all of this up to get a month's worth of, living expenses, and then I multiplied that by 6. And I only included those expenses because in a time of a true emergency, in a time of a crisis, I'm not spending money on streaming. I'm not getting the takeout. We're getting the groceries that we already budgeted for. I'm not doing cute random shopping. I'm doing, what it takes, spending money on what it takes to keep the household afloat. Now I will say, when I added up all of those expenses and multiplied it by 6, I actually made the end goal, the end savings goal, a little bit higher. So if I did that math and the 6 months came out to $7,534, I'm making this up, but if it came out to something like that, we then said, okay, let's round it up to $10,000. So we decided to oversave because one, I like a nice round number. I feel like it's nice to save for a nice round number. And two, I am an oversaver. I do oversave, and actually oversaving in my emergency fund helped me at some point, and I can share a little bit later what I mean by that. Okay, so moving on. How do you go about doing the actual saving? First off, if you haven't watched my budget video where I share the budget worksheet that I use every month and how I paid off my debt, I would start there because that really lays the foundation. But essentially, when working on my monthly household budget, I had to see how much money wasn't going to the necessary household expenses that could go to this emergency fund. So I treated my emergency fund as a line item on my budget. It had a line on the budget. I treated it as a bill. It had to get paid. It had to get money going toward it every month. Because honestly, saving is a habit that you have to practice. It is a habit that requires consistency from you. It requires you to do what you say you gonna do. You need to come through for you. Personally, I love to save. I love having money goals and working toward money goals. So this kind of thing excites me, but I understand that not everyone is that way. So having a budget can really help with this, and treating your emergency fund like a bill can really help with this. Start small if you need to. Pick a number that you feel good about that will help you be consistent toward this every month. A lot of times for us, that was like $100 a month. Now I will say we started really building this emergency fund while paying off debt. So it did take some time, and we did have to start small because other money was wrapped up into paying off debt. But once we paid off that debt, we were able to take that, new disposable income and throw it toward the emergency fund and then build that up quicker. I just didn't feel comfortable, focusing on paying off my debt so hardcore with no emergency fund in the works. I didn't feel comfortable with that, so that's why we did it that way. So if you want an emergency fund and you examine your budget and you see that there was no money that could go toward an emergency fund, then it's time to start bringing more money in, or look at lowering your expenses elsewhere, like shopping for lower cost internet or lower cost auto insurance or something. But if you do look at your budget and you realize you do have money that could go toward an emergency each month, then figure out what works best for you. Because if you say, oh, I'm gonna take all of my unbudgeted $150 and put it toward an emergency every month, but really you only end up doing $75 because you like to treat yourself to boba tea or something, then stick with $75 because you might feel like crap because you're not sticking to something that you said you would do. You know, we saved up 6 months of living expenses and still ordered takeout and still bought books and vinyl and things that we like. The savings was the financial priority though, like we didn't lose sight of that. I really think personal finance is about finding a balance between taking care of what needs to be done and not being miserable while you do it. And if you tend to get a little miserable, a little down in the dumps as you're working on saving, especially because, you know, now that you're saving, you can't spend that money on fun things. You know, check in on your progress along the way because I think that makes you feel a little bit better. I checked in regularly when it came to the savings goal of building up an emergency fund just to see how much progress we were making, just so we could see, you know, do we have 3 months left, 2 months left, 1 month left? Like knowing that we were getting so close was giving me a lot of confidence and, you know, feeling better about working toward this goal. Now, where should you store your emergency fund? I put my emergency fund in a high yield savings account, which is an account that offers higher interest than your regular savings account. You know, your emergency fund will most likely be quite a bit of money, so you might as well put it somewhere where you can earn, you know, a little bit more than you might if you put it in a regular account. I like Ally for something like this, but other banks offer high yield savings accounts too, so just do your research. Your emergency fund should not be your IRA or your 401k or some kind of account where you might face a penalty for needing to access that money. It should be somewhere where you can pretty easily access that when you need to. Your emergency fund should also be its own dedicated pool of money. You know, emergency fund and savings aren't necessarily the same to me because I'm saving for a lot of goals and those savings goals shouldn't be mixed up with my emergency fund money. So I wouldn't recommend just having one account where you can't differentiate between what's the emergency fund and what's, oh, I'm saving for my next vacation. Ally Bank is good for this too actually because you can have one savings account that has multiple buckets or categories where you can see the difference between these pools of money. I also think where you store your emergency fund versus where your other money is stored has a lot to do with your personal financial discipline. If you tend to dip into your savings at any minor inconvenience, then maybe your emergency fund should be at a completely different bank where it takes, you know, a day or two to access those funds. Now, there are some things to keep in mind when it comes to maintaining your emergency fund because it's not just a one and done thing. You have to figure out what an emergency is and stick to that definition. Having your emergency fund philosophy set in stone will help you act accordingly. It's going to help you decide and understand what is an emergency and what isn't. So for me, an emergency is anything that impacts our health, housing, and transportation. So just because my friends are going to Miami and I don't want to feel left out doesn't mean that's an emergency. That sounds like something that I need to save up the money to go or just, you know, Google pictures of Miami instead. Like, this is not an emergency. Your emergency fund also isn't a bank, okay? Just because your cousin 5 states away says they need a new part for their car doesn't mean that's your emergency, okay? This fund is to keep your household afloat in trying times. Another thing about maintaining an emergency fund is there are times where you do have to spend money from it. And I would highly suggest to replenish that money to build that savings back up as soon as you can. So after I had that root canal, you know, working on the next month's budget, it was like, okay, what can we think about differently or budget differently this month so that we can get this emergency fund built back up as soon as we can. You don't want that money to just get depleted over time. You want to keep it maintained. And lastly, because an emergency fund is not a one and done thing, I would suggest checking in on it regularly. And this could be, you know, once a year or so when you're setting up a new budget. This could be whenever a new household expense comes up. For example, I had rent go up. I know a lot of people had in the last couple of years. And actually, over saving in my emergency fund helped with a situation like this. I had to do the math again in the emergency fund to take into account the new rent price along with new spending that we were seeing with the inflated economy that we were in. And then, you know, adding all that up, multiplying that by 6, and the emergency fund that we saved still covered these new costs. So over saving ended up helping me there. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying that's my truth. That's it, you guys. That is how I built my emergency fund and the mindset that I use when maintaining the fund. I hope this helped in some way. And if you're on the journey of building an emergency fund or you're thinking about getting started, I wish you the best because it really does take time. But the end result is so worth it and puts you in a much better financial position. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.